our second meeting in January. Before we start the meeting, can everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please take a seat. Okay, so we are going to have Dr. Rogers give us a brief presentation on facilities. Dr. Rogers, all yours.
Thank you very much. So I'll have a couple of brief announcements and then we'll get into the facilities work. So perfect. So want to make an announcement. As I'm sure everyone is aware, there's a special election that is being called to fill the congressional seat that was vacated. That election is going to be held on February 13th. Several of the school districts that are in the congressional district where the special election is being held are going to be closing on that day, same as we do for the regular election day in November, because all 7 of our elementary schools are used as polling sites and we're unable to avoid that responsibility to the community. So what we're planning to do, similar to what several other school districts are doing, is have an elementary professional development day for teachers that day, but no instruction for schools. So from the perspective of the calendar, it will operate for children like a snow day, and for adults, we'll be doing some professional development, building on some of the anti-bullying and anti-bias training that we already have planned. Speaking of anti-bias, the anti-bias task force is going through its organizational meetings. We've created a website that has meeting summaries for the anti-bias task force, and they are planning their first public forum. So we'll have more information, which we'll send out by email to the community about that, but wanted to let everyone know that there's now a website that will be the container for anything that is developed by the task force. And then lastly, we tend not to talk about the governor's budget proposal much here in Syosset. We've been fortunate that in past years the proposal has been generous to us and it's allowed us to enhance our program. Unusually, this year, the executive budget proposal, which is the first step in the state's process, has proposed a fairly significant cut to a lot of Long Island school districts. We're fortunate that we were spared a deep cut that some of the other school districts experienced, but we did experience a small cut. And I think there's an opportunity for us to work with our elected officials to impress upon them the importance of education and to recognize the inflationary environment that we're in, and that the state is a partner in helping us deal with that inflation. So in the past, we have often joined with some neighboring school districts to do some advocacy work in Albany, and I think we have an opportunity to do that again this year because we all have a shared interest in making sure that the state keeps its commitments to funding with schools. So the board adopted a draft facilities proposal and charged us, the administration, with the responsibility of educating the public about it and getting some feedback from the public on the proposal. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to share the feedback that we've gotten. And just first some data about the work that we've done. Apologize, I'm slow with my fingers here. We did a tool called Thought Exchange, and the tool has an AI component to it that helps summarize large volumes of comments. We had about 1,000 people respond to that. We had almost 100 people tune into the live presentations that we did, and ultimately about 348 people after the live presentations also tuned into the recordings of those live presentations. So we have gotten some penetration into the community. We've gotten some 900 comments back from the community, some comments, some questions, some votes of encouragement, some votes of skepticism, just as you would imagine when you engage a large number of people. But in terms of themes, a number of themes have come out as sort of the top themes, and I'm not surprised by any of these, but what I would say is that they form the basis for an outline for a Q&A document that the district is preparing so that we can respond to the comments and the questions that came up. So at the top of the list, of course, was how is this going to be paid for, and within that is how much of this does the state pay for, how much of this is paid for locally, how much of this is paid for from reserves, how much of this is paid for from property taxes, etc. So we'll have some responses to that this evening, and then more follow-up when we do the frequently asked questions document. The second is a lot of questions about how cost estimating is done and how costs are determined, what the bidding process is. Are we looking for the most effective, the most cost-effective way to do construction? What are the tools that we use to manage costs? What happens when there are cost overruns? All of those kinds of questions about how public sector construction gets done. The third is around the bidding process, the contracting process. How does that work? How do we know that we have contractors that we have confidence in? How do we ensure that we get the best prices, et cetera? And then last, a lot of questions around construction logistics.
What we anticipate in terms of future enrollment, and are we building sufficient space to accommodate that future enrollment? A lot of folks use the opportunity for some open-ended responses to us to share ideas for additional work that they think should be included or considered, if not now, in the future. Certainly bathrooms was a frequent topic of discussion. The district has done a lot of work on bathrooms over the course of the last 8 years. There's more bathroom work planned in the current project, but we certainly understand that the bathrooms are going to be a continuous focus for us. At the high school, again, questions around how the library conversion results in more classrooms, how those would be programmed, a need to better understand the purpose of the bus loop, and I actually have a perfect illustration today. Here at the middle school, every single bus was on time, and I have a middle school radio in my office, and I could hear the chatter over the radio as everyone was saying, oh my goodness, every bus is on time today because the high school is having midterms, so there is no busing operation at the high school, or at least not on the same schedule. So with every bus on time at the middle school, I didn't get a single notification of a late bus at the elementary school. So that's what the bus loop is intended to accomplish, get the buses on time out of the high school. There were questions about the pool and whether we could explain why renovations are needed, and there were a lot of folks who asked us to do more extensive renovations than we were planning. Similarly, there were a group of people that asked us to consider a dedicated wrestling gym, a dedicated testing center, more science rooms, dedicated robotics rooms, and more work in the auditorium. So none of those suggestions surprise me either. All of these are places that are opportunities. The board did talk about many of these things as part of its process of really narrowing its priorities. And then on the elementary side, as I mentioned, concern about whether there's adequate classroom space given our enrollment growth, whether that space supports specials beyond the classroom itself, the quality of elementary outdoor spaces, including spaces during inclement weather, and at the middle school, an opportunity to explain more how the vestibules function as a safety device. There was some comments about adding lights, as we did at the high school, to the field, and there were comments around adding more science space. So it's sort of a preview on what some of those answers are going to be. Since we were asked all these questions, I'll at least start the conversation, and obviously part of doing this is both to share it with the board, but also to explain these slides, because the slides will be posted online and made available to the public. So this will begin the process of answering the questions that the public had. So the project that is proposed, that the board asked us to get feedback on, is essentially $99 million, but the board has proposed using $4 million in reserves to defray some of that cost. The construction costs are also offset by state aid, and we have the advantage of seeing our state aid percentage go up significantly in the 10 years that I've been here. So when I arrived here, the state was willing to pay us 16 cents on the dollar for every dollar of construction that we did. Now the state is paying us 42 cents on the dollar for every dollar of construction that we do. So there is an advantage to doing construction now while the state is more generous than it was 10 years ago. So the debt service that we would pay, our mortgage payment, if you will, is offset by the fact that the state will pay as much as 42 cents of that debt service. So we've gone through a calculation in order to arrive at what is the tax impact. And so the best way we can illustrate this, because everyone's tax burden is a little different depending on the home that you live in, is to say for every $10,000 of tax that you pay, the cost of this proposition, roughly $100 million, would be about $169. So another way of looking at that is if you paid $20,000 in school taxes, the annual cost of the debt service would be $340, for example. And then Proposition 2 was to provide air conditioning for the elementary gyms and one gym in each of the two middle schools. That was going to be a $10 million project, and that would have the same impact, about $26 per every $10,000 of taxes paid. So if you paid $20,000 a year in school taxes, you would pay $52 for Proposition 2. So I feel like with the questions that came back, I had an obligation to do a better job of explaining what some of the shortcomings are of this gym space at the high school. So I tried to pick two things that I thought would illustrate our challenges. So on the left-hand side is a chart that explains the number of classes for phys ed that we do not have space for. So we have class sizes on average around 25 kids, and over a 2-day period, phys ed is every other day, we have about 100 classes that we have to provide in order to provide phys ed to students, and phys ed is a mandated class by the state. We only have space to accommodate 95 of those sections. So what happens is, in every 2-day cycle, there are 5 sections that do not have a space assigned to them for the class. So kids will often meet in the hallway to take attendance, and then from there we'll go to another class, either double up a class that's already in a gym or do some sort of an exercise where they're doing classroom learning about a phys ed topic, but they're not in the gym necessarily doing phys ed itself. So as the high school is projected to grow, every time we add 25 more students at the high school, that's one more section that's not going to have a gym location to go into. And by the time we reach our enrollment peak, 5, 6, 7 years in the future, we'll probably be short 14 slots every 2 days for students. So the reason for needing more phys ed space is so that we can accommodate the phys ed program during the school day. And then I always think it's useful to benchmark against other districts. I tried to pick districts that were similar in size to Syosset in terms of the graduating class, with the exception of Jericho, which is about half our size, but it's a comparison because it's right next door. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that. It must be really hard to follow me when I'm on the wrong slide. Thank you, Mr. Rotolo, for straightening me out. We usually have a little monitor in front of us, and I watch the presentation on the monitor, and now I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, and clearly not succeeding in the way that I'd hoped. So the chart on the left illustrates the number of classes, phys ed classes, that don't have a space, and our projections for how many sections will not have a space as we go into the future and the enrollment grows at the high school. So the space is necessary just to accommodate the enrollment growth in our PE program. And then on the right-hand side, we're benchmarking against similar schools in terms of graduating class. Again, Jericho is not as large, but the middle school and high school are in the same property. So in terms of the number of students using the gym space that's there, it ends up being comparable. And what this illustrates is we have about 5 square feet of gym space per student at the high school. Most of these comparison districts are about double that. And if you look at Jericho, they're about triple that. So those space constraints also make it more challenging to do the athletics programs and after-school activities, community use as well. And there have been a handful of head scratchers at the district in terms of our facilities, and one of them is the ceiling height in the auxiliary gym at the high school is actually too low for basketball and too low for volleyball. I don't know why it was designed that way, and it would be tremendously expensive to try and raise the ceiling, but it does constrain that gym in terms of what it can be used for in terms of regulation games. So we were asked questions about how much usage the pool gets, and the answer is that the pool is busy from 6 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, from the various teams that practice there, the program, the phys ed program during the school day, our Stingrays program for young kids at night, and then our adult education, which is the last thing in the pool before they start it all over again the next morning. On the weekends, we have Learn to Swim programs, and all summer we have 3 sessions of Learn to Swim programs as well. So I've put some usage details on here in terms of the pool. The pool is in, I think, remarkably good shape considering its age. That doesn't mean that it's in perfect shape, and because of its age, it is probably going to need consistent, persistent work on keeping it in good condition. It is in a building that has a wooden roof structure. Obviously, it's a humid environment, so that's something that we have to pay attention to as well. So more things to just talk about. As I mentioned earlier, we're required to do visual inspections of the school district. Syosset took this opportunity back in 2016 to build a plan for some of the work that needed to get done in our buildings. We, again, took that opportunity to build a plan for the things that we thought were building systems that needed to be changed out within the next 5 years before they reached the end of their useful life. Obviously, these are all of our properties are older. A lot of the building mechanical and electrical systems are antiquated. We had a condition at the high school earlier this year where we had to close for a day because of an electrical problem in the building. That electrical problem has still not been resolved. We're able to have school because we have a generator on site, but the generator can't be a permanent solution. At some point, we have to fix the electrical problem, and that will be again, because of the scale of the building and the age of the electrical components, that is going to be a large project just to remediate that one issue that we have at the high school right now. So what we don't want to do is get into a situation where we have lots of things failing at the same time. So we can handle one or two emergencies. We don't want to have several. So the more we can get in front of these things, the better off we're going to be. There were a lot of questions, comments that came back from the surveys about whether everything that was listed as a priority from the visual inspection really was a priority, or how did we arrive at these priorities. And as the board knows, in the fall, the board asked our architects, engineers to go through all of the things that were identified and narrow the list as much as possible to the absolute necessities. And so that was what survived into the final plan that was shared with the public. So we'll put more detail about that process into our FAQ document so that the public's aware of it. There were questions about how the approval process works. Just the board has to select a final scope of work and then approve it. Once that happens, the public has to approve it. Once that happens, the architects and engineers will draw up the actual plans, and then those plans will be sent to the State Education Department. The State Education Department will review them. If they approve them, they'll issue us a building permit. So unlike residential construction where you'd get a building permit from the town, we get a building permit from the State Education Department, and we cannot bid the project until we have a building permit. So the bidding process is an open, competitive bidding process. We are required by law to take the least expensive responsible bidder. So we do a lot to vet the bidders to make sure that they're responsible, so that when we choose the least expensive one, we know we're getting somebody who's going to do the job. Every bidder, every contractor has to have bonds and insurances. We are scrupulous about making sure that they have the right bonds and insurances. This is to protect the board, to protect the public, to protect the public's investment. So it's an important part of the construction cycle, but it is another aspect of it that takes time. And then ultimately, once all of those processes are done, we'll begin construction. The construction work itself is overseen by our construction managers. Their job is to make sure that it's done safely, both for the workers and for the staff and students who are on site. Their job is to make sure that the contracts are followed to the letter. Their job is to make sure that the drawings that were done by the architects and engineers are followed to the letter. Their job is to make sure that data that would inform any actions that we might need to take later. For example, if there was a concrete pour that didn't perform as it should, our construction managers would have recorded the temperature and humidity on the day that the concrete was poured, so that we would know what the conditions were like. If we had to go back and seek warranty from the contractor, we would have evidence to support our bid for a warranty situation. So there are ways, and we experienced this at the high school with the vestibule project and the fitness center. They took over a year to do, so you have school going on while there's construction going on. It is possible to do that safely, but it requires a lot of coordination. Then again, we got some questions about our enrollment trends. We have our enrollment projections from our consultant 2 years ago. We now have a little bit of data, and as the board has heard me say over and over again, at small buildings like elementary schools, the estimates are always going to be very volatile. So the fact that we're off a little bit, 8, 10 kids for our 2 most full buildings doesn't surprise me at all. At the middle schools, the gap is a little bit larger, in the neighborhood of 20-some kids. But again, we're tracking closely with what our estimates are, and from the perspective of being nervous about growth, the fact that we're a little bit under those projections is a little bit of breathing room. So that concludes my report, the feedback that we've gotten from the public. I'm, as always, happy to respond to any questions or comments that the board has for me or the team. And we do have, of course, Elite and H2M here with us tonight to answer your technical or more detailed questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rogers. And then since the board is going to have a discussion on facilities, so we will just go to the discussion items. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Rogers?
I just had one question about the presentation. Regarding the section on Syosset High School, the gym, Is there availability for us to either get a waiver from the state or any process by which we could consider having participation in team activities, like school team activities, count as a phys ed requirement?
There is a provision for that in the regulations. I'm not sure what is required in order to enable it, but I'm familiar that there is one there.
The reason why I'm asking, obviously, what follows from that is we may not need as much gym space if folks aren't required to take phys ed during the day because they placed out due to team sport participation.
Yeah, understood. I think the follow-on questions for that would be, there is a curriculum associated with PE, so you lose the curriculum as well. So I think you'd want to start that from a conversation around the curriculum that's in the PE class rather than the space that's available for PE. But those would be the two things that are in tension with one another.
Okay, Dr. Park?
Can we go to the net tax impact? Yeah. So I'm just looking at the total amount. If we go from, if we add the proposition 2, 10 million to proposition 1 and make that as one big one, then will the average change per 10,000, will it be less than 195 or will it be 195?
It would be 169 plus 26, so 185, 195. This is why I don't do math without a calculator. Yeah, 190. Thank you.
For the next slide, gym space constraint at high school. From the numbers that we looked at, once we build that big additional gym in high school, Freeport seems to be the closest district to us in terms of the number of students and the square footage of the total gym space. Can we find out how they feel about their space? Is that enough for them? Do they wish they had more? Also, I guess we need to know whether their students' interest level in sports is similar to ours, but it will be interesting to know whether they feel this is enough or should we, I mean, it's a little bit late in the game, but do we need to start with something bigger to begin with?
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to ask my colleagues. I suspect that there isn't an athletic director anywhere that wouldn't want more gym space. What I would observe is that I don't believe that there is any school district in Section 8 that has as many teams as we do. And I know that we and Jericho are the only districts in this group that have fencing programs. So that's a winter sport. Winter is the tightest season because all of the sports are indoors. And so it just adds to our space constraint that we have a boys and girls fencing team in a very constrained environment to begin with. And as you know, the boys and girls fencing teams don't use the gym, they use the student lobby, but there really is no room for any spectators in there because the tracks take up the entire facility, the tracks and the teams.
Ms. Abramson?
Can we just take a second to go over the portables and the new additions on the elementary school, because I've gotten some feedback and there's some misconceptions on the benefits of the building and keeping the portables, and that it's actually not one classroom or building because of that benefit, it's many. So if we can just go through that really fast again.
So the benefits of that type of construction or the overlap in having extra classrooms for a period of time before we decommission the old portables? The latter. Okay. So the two elementary schools that are most space constrained right now are Berry Hill and Walt Whitman. Our enrollment projections for both of those buildings are a peak followed by a drop-off. So what we don't want to do is overbuild space, because then we'll have spent more money than we needed to spend. But what we do want to do is make sure that we have enough space for the students that we anticipate having. So since there is a short-term bubble, if we build the new space, but we don't demolish the old space, for some period of time, both spaces will exist together simultaneously. So in a building that has, let's take Whitman for example, they have 3 portables now. We're proposing building 4 new classrooms. So for a period of time, there will be 7 more classrooms. Then at some point, if the enrollment follows the projections, we'll be able to decommission the 3 existing portables, and the campus will be net +1 classroom, but we won't have built more than we needed for what we anticipated in the future. If the enrollment projections prove to be wrong, we'll have +1 room, but we might delay even further when we demolish the portables.
Okay, all right. So Dr. Rogers, looking at the all these discussions and all the different presentations, so now we are, so the next step would be to determine when we need to present the bond vote to the community. And I do have a big concern that if we rush this, we won't have enough time to communicate with the community, or even to answer all the community questions. So for myself, I would like to put off the bond vote, just so that we can deliver the message and communicate, spend more time communicating with the community. And this way, because this is a big project, we're talking about over $100 million project, and I do feel that we shouldn't be rushing this. We want to do it right rather than rushing it through. Okay, and obviously board members can chime in on this too, instead of rushing it to have the bond vote even next month or even April. In my opinion, I think this is too rushed. So, okay. If anyone wants to chime in. Mr. Greco?
Excuse me. I agree. I don't think we should be rushing this. I actually think there's still outreach that needs to be done to the community. You know, and then eventually we're going to have informational sessions and so on, so everyone understands what they're voting on. But this is a major project, and unfortunately, a very large portion of it is not glamorous. I mean, we're talking about electrical systems that could potentially have kids missing school if they fail. And the vast majority of what I'll call Proposition 1 includes stuff like that, like roofing, pointing, ADA compliance for bathrooms and safety and security. So I think there needs to be a little bit more time and effort put into not only the process of seeking additional feedback like you've already done with the PTA and like you've done with these 2 information sessions. So a little bit discouraging that only 90, I think you said 93 attended or watched, I guess, the live presentations or the 2 presentations. But that's the function of them being in December, I take it. So I don't see how we can do this by March. And I think we need to continue what we're doing, but have a little bit more focus on, if we stretch this out, how to get the most potential community feedback and stakeholder feedback, and then also present this in a way that everyone knows exactly what they're voting on, especially when they're voting on a 9-digit number.
Actually, so I agree with Mr. Greco. I think you did a good job of outlining the fact that there's 2 elements of this, right? One is the feedback stage, where information needs to come back to us in terms of things that can potentially be improved, things that may be swapped in or out, and the stakeholder I think is a key element, right? I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to weigh in on the potential plans, parents, students, teachers, faculty, staff, admin, et cetera, to make sure that enough stuff comes in for improvement. And it was interesting because I wonder if, I think it's important that we do as good a job as we can in seeking that feedback and being open to it. So for example, before we are completely committed to plunking down $10 million for a gym for the high school, I'm not so sure that I'd want to be completely dismissive about any feedback about whether or not school participation in teams in terms of participating in phys ed is an alternative before we come to a conclusion without actually having heard any opinions about that. So I think feedback first, and then following that, when we get through that process with a little bit more time, then spending a reasonable amount of time in outreach to make sure everyone understands exactly what's been concluded, and enough time and effort behind convincing folks, not convincing because we're not in the business of convincing, but presenting as detailed, factual, and useful information for folks to make educated decisions when they vote for or against the potential projects. So that's a long way of saying, I think moving too quickly frequently is, at least in this case, is not the way we want to go.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Astrick. Anyone else? Ms. Ambrinson?
I agree that we need time, but I also think we need to set a time frame that we want to get things moving by. I just don't want it to be we need more time and then we miss windows of opportunity for building quickly and efficiently while we're dealing with the space issues we're dealing with and the benefits from taxing and things like that. So I think that we should, yes, take more time. I think it's extremely important to get information out to as many people as possible and dispel misinformation and get opinions, but I don't think that we should keep it going forever. I think we need to set stages.
I also agree that March would definitely not be a good time to put a vote out on this, especially since a lot of the community still has questions and whatnot, so I'm not for a March vote, but I just wanted to make a suggestion that the administration from each of the buildings, if we could get some direct feedback from them, and also from, for argument's sake, the phys ed department over at the high school. It doesn't need to be anything, super formal, but to hear from them as to what the construction, just using the gym as an example, what would the construction of that gym mean for them as a department? What could, how do they find it to be useful? We know it's going to be useful, but to what degree? I think if the community heard a little bit from that perspective, it would be very helpful, especially for people that have never had children that use the high school facilities, or people who still have babies that they have many years, before they actually see it. To hear from the department and hear from administration would be very useful. And also in the elementary buildings and the middle school buildings as well, whatever we're looking to do in those buildings, can we hear from the people that are directly affected by it? The high school library, science classrooms, the science department, whoever's directly affected by the actual projects that we're looking to do in these buildings. It might help to give a bigger picture for people to answer some more of those questions that are coming out. Just a thought.
Thank you. Ms. Falco?
So I just want to second what Lisa just said, because I think she struck a really good point. I think people who have never had children in the high school or have babies and or elementary school kids or middle school kids that haven't experienced the high school and don't know how incredibly tight the gym is, may not see the benefit of it and why it's so necessary. And if as Lisa said, the gym teachers in the program could just highlight all the reasons why it's so desperately needed, I think that it would make it more understandable to the other people, because anybody who's been through the high school 100% knows that it's desperately needed. But if you haven't been there and you haven't experienced it, then you don't have any experience with it. And it would be great, I guess, for all the other projects as well. That would be fantastic.
Go ahead.
Definitely would agree with everything that was said so far, and the feedback from the ground, so to speak, from the teachers, staff, is critical here. And my concern also is to echo Brian, the numbers, 99 people tuned in, 1,000 filled out the form. That's concerning in the community. If I believe the number is in the neighborhood of 26,000 registered voters, is that correct? Or in that vicinity, or am I off? Okay, so we have 1,000 responses by email. So we have essentially our captive audience with that list. How are we reaching our seniors that are represent a significant percentage at the polls, right? So how do we shout it out to the outside of the school families, if you will, you know, with students, students currently involved, kids currently involved. So that is definitely a concern. So absolutely, this cannot be rushed. I agree.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So, Dr. R, from the previous presentations, we understand that if we do the bond vote in March, we have a very good chance of preserving the start time for summer of 2025. And if we don't that, what's the time frame? What does it look like? And in terms of the SED approval, in terms of putting it out for bid, that's number one. And number two, if we cannot preserve the summer of 2025 to break ground, in terms of the enrollment bubbles, especially the high school, it's going to reach the peak in 2028. How would that facility look like in the high school if we don't start the work in summer of 2025?
Well, obviously, sooner is better. Part of what we want to do, anytime we're breaking ground, the more earth moving we can do during the summer when there aren't as many people on campuses, dust becomes less of an issue. So the other advantage of trying to go quickly is to avoid a year's worth of inflationary costs in the marketplace. So, you know, the good news is the CPI is coming down, but there's still, you know, an annual 3% inflation, so the sooner we get started, the better. So if it's not possible to, if our time frame is such that it's not possible to start in the summertime, there's nothing that stops us from doing our work, let's say starting in September or starting in October. There's some complications that come along with that. We just have to work harder at doing dust mitigation during the initial earth moving phases. That might mean that we would do second shift. So after school dismisses, do some of the heavier earth moving, or do that on weekends or things like that. I don't know if our friends from Elite would want to talk about other, you know, mid-year construction mitigation steps that you would take. But while you're coming to the microphone, Mike, I think what I would say is it's of course possible to do construction during the school year. It has to be, because most big things that you build take a year to build. So you're going to be doing construction while there's kids in school. So there are ways of working around it. The more work we can do in the summer, the easier it is logistically, but it is not infeasible for us to do work out of summer. So if you feel as a board that you want to make sure that the public is better informed about the decision that we're making, and the implication is that we just have to work a little bit harder on managing the construction, I think that that would be a trade-off that you would instruct us to do, and I would say that that trade-off is possible to do. So maybe just, Mike, if you are easy, if you could go through some of the details of how you'd manage that.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having us. Construction and earthwork removal during the year, we're going to have to set up site fencing, 8 feet, partition, and dust mitigation and so forth. There's also going to be noise, which we would have to make some kind of allotment for. No work during exams and things of such. It's something that is done, but we'd love to work in the summer. questions, just lay it at me, or lay it at us.
So how often have you done projects where you've had to do some earth moving during the school year as opposed to during the summer? And what are the kinds of things that you've done by using shift differentials and things like that in order to get the work done?
Well, believe it or not, it's something that's becoming more recurrent. It happens a lot now. And it is more expensive to work in the evening. But working outside in the evening is not really done because you would have to prepare lighting and so forth. And the winter months are not friendly to earthwork removal. You would want to get it done earlier in the spring and the summer and so forth. But anything can be done. I've built in Manhattan, and you got to keep going 24 hours a day. It can be done, but it's just more costly.
So, Mike, I see you wanting to jump in.
Just like anything, like some of the stuff that, as he pointed out, you just have to be able to buy the plan. So if those are some of the things that we need to take in consideration as far as after-hour work, weekend work, we have to buy it as part of the plan, but it can be done. As far as work implementation, we also have to put out blackout dates, days that might have exams, to try to mitigate some of the costs, some of the noise that would be going on with implementing some of the work. But it's also part of just buying the plan out, whatever's necessary to keep things moving. There might be a cost associated with doing it outside of that window.
Right, just for the board's benefit, we're using jargon here when we say buy the plan. So what that means is these constraints will be worked into the bid specifications. So when a contractor is bidding on the project, they will know that there are some special conditions. There might be blackout dates. There might be the need to do some work after hours and some work during the day. There might be the need to do some work on the weekends because of the bid specifications that we give. And so the contractor, when they bid on the project, they're bidding on not just the work to be done, but all the constraints that go along with it. So the contractor goes into it eyes open, knowing that whatever number they give us, they're going to have to live with, even if they incur overtime down the road. So that's what Mike means when he says they buy the plan. They're committing to do every facet of the plan. And so, you know, I kind of circle back to what I said. Can it be done? Yes. Is it happening more frequently with schools? Yes. And, you know, if it can be done, certainly SIASA can do it. And if you feel like, you as a board feel like it's necessary to take more time, we'll find a way to get it done. Maybe not. And we weren't going to be able to start all of these jobs simultaneously in the summer of 25 in any event. There's going to be, you know, some projects are going to get up to SED first, some are going to get approved first, others are going to get approved later. So these were going to be on a rolling basis anyway. So this just pushes back the start of the rolling basis by however many months you decide to continue the public engagement process. It would just push the whole schedule out by that number of months at the other end.
Great, thank you. Anyone, Dr. Park?
So this budget of 110 million, is that with the condition that we start with the March the vote, or is it for May vote?
Well, that's something I need to take guidance from the board on.
The estimate that we have for 110, is that putting into consideration that we're going to have the vote in March and therefore start the job 2025 summer? Or is this considering that the vote will take place in May and then start later than summer of 2025?
So each of the estimates that are prepared by the construction managers and architects includes both inflationary costs and contingency fund in case something unexpected comes along. So all of these projects have some accommodation for inflation because we know we can't get all of the projects started. And then what ends up happening is in a big project like this, and this is what happened with our 2016 project, some of the smaller projects within the overall project will come in a little high, and others will come in surprisingly low. And over the course of a lot of different projects, they kind of balance each other out. So when we're doing estimates of what we think the inflation might be and what we think the contingencies might be. But back to the point about the contractor buys the job, they buy the drawings. What that means is we're telling the contractor what we want to have done. What we are holding back as contingencies is part of what we know about. What they're buying is the amount of work that has to be done. There's some contingencies in the job, but in terms of the inflation contingency, that's in us just estimating how much overall revenue will be needed.
You know, the difficulty of starting later during the school year is after hours, you know, later work time, difficulty, you know, putting walls and all that stuff. So that's going to increase the fee. So what are we talking about? Is that something that's worth thinking about and rushing it, or is this minuscule that it's not worth, you know, rushing the vote?
Yeah, I don't know if, Mike, you want to hazard a guess. What I would say is, if you rush the vote and the vote fails, assume that you might add 12 months to your project timeline, and then you'll have a full year of inflation no matter what. If you delay a couple of months and as a result of that delay, the public feels better educated and more likely to support it, then you might lose not a full year's worth of inflation, but you might lose a couple of months or the optimal start date, but you'd still have a start date. So my own gut feeling is that losing a whole year would be more costly than losing a couple of months.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, all right, so Dr. I also understand that the thought exchange, the feedback that we got, we received a lot of comments, what you listed before, and then we also received comments about the two elementary schools that are experiencing a bubble in enrollment. And so in terms of these two elementary schools, which are Berry Hill and Walt Whitman, some of the feedbacks were about adding the gym in both elementary schools as well as the HBT track. And knowing that we will have a huge bubble in the high school in 2028, I do feel that there is a need that we could invest in the Berry Hill and Walt Whitman gym, just so that we have more space, not just for the elementary school, and we can use that space for multiple purposes in elementary school for, let's say, in the winter time, or when they have all different activities. Instead of putting them in smaller classrooms, they have this gym, and then they can use the gym for concerts or different plays, or just a lot of purposes, as well as having the high school teams to use those two gyms. If we can build them to the specs of all the different sports, that I do see that adding values. And then in the long run, it's our kids who are actually benefiting from the space. So I am all about adding that to it, and then it'll make sense to put those three different categories, different scopes into the second proposition. As we discussed, we were talking about the first proposition and the second, and then the gym and the HBT track. I would like to see them being added to the second proposition. So, okay, Ms. Abramson?
Respectfully, I have been in 2 elementary schools with my children. Neither have been able to use their gym for recess, ever. So if we're talking about adding a gym to 2 elementary schools specifically, I have never had my kids experience recess in a gym and take that benefit. So we can't really say it's equitable to put it into 2 schools that used to have that benefit maybe and now can't, when we've had 7 that can't. That's just how I feel about it. I think it's a great idea. I really want recess in the gym. I think it's an amazing thing. I think not having it in a gym and having it in the classroom is a huge deficit to the kids. But to say that these two schools get a gym before the rest of the schools can get a gym when we've all been experiencing that, I think is not equitable to all the elementary schools.
Ms. Ostrich?
Sure, so it's interesting, right? We were having this original discussion, and I proposed that all the elementary schools be on a rotating schedule for upgrades. The board shook their head and said nothing, essentially, right? So for me, this is less about gym space than it is about Lisa's suggestion, which is understanding from the administrators and the faculty and the staff and the teachers on the ground what would be the most useful space to be added to those elementary schools. I don't know if it's gym space. That's from the thought exchange. That's parents' point of view. I don't know if it's teachers, administrative, faculty, staff as well. What I want to hear is what would be the useful common space and the classroom space that those elementary schools need. And if it's gym space, great. If it's something else, great. That's what I want to hear. But in terms of we have to do all 7 elementary school gyms and a high school and the middle school, all the gyms at the same time instead of doing it on rotating schedules, that doesn't make any sense. That's not a reasonable argument from my point of view about why you wouldn't do something. That means every school needs everything all the time at every juncture, and we couldn't separate anything. That, to me, that's not a decision-making point.
Jack, I don't think I've ever been accused of not responding to you, but I must have forgot that meeting you're talking about. I do agree with you, though. We're building on top of a $90-something million proposal where we already have a second proposition for another 10, and now we're talking about potentially 2 school gyms on top of that and a turf field. So we're already in a $120 million range, and I don't think we can effectively have a conversation now about how to do this equitably. Otherwise, I don't think we'll ever get anywhere. I think the idea is there has to be some kind of rolling basis, and there must be some way, and you've probably done it already, Dr. Rogers, to determine which schools have the need now, not just based on enrollment if we're talking about gyms, but do the gyms actually affect the ability to handle the enrollment? Because I don't see any way to do this for all 7 schools. You know, it's difficult to do for 2 schools. And it's coming up tonight for the first time because of community feedback. But if we're adding everything we do right now in a turf field, which sounds wonderful, and I'm sure if we dig through every piece of feedback, there's a lot of wonderful proposals. I think we have to find the few that we need and do those. I think, as Ms. Chang said, they need to go in this second proposition. I think it's a fair way to present to the public that we have proposition 1, this is what we need, and we have proposition 2, this is what we'd really like, and go from there.
Ms. Valkov?
So I think Barry Hill and Walt Whitman were being discussed because they have a portal that obviously really need to be addressed and taken care of. I do think that if we're looking to add gyms to buildings, that we do need to go back and look at all 7 elementary schools to see which gyms are in the most need to see. And it may come out that it's Barry Hill and Walt Whitman, but it may not be. It may be another school is more in need of another gym. And so we could do that. I would actually propose, since obviously I don't think anybody was suggesting that everything has to be done all at once. I don't think that was ever something that was on the table. I think that if we want to do what's best for the community and try to maintain equity between the schools, which has always been a plan, maybe you make a 3rd proposition that has a rotating basis of the elementary schools to add gyms to whichever schools need them, and I'm not sure all the schools need them, but you can add that as a 3rd section. I don't think we need to combine everything into what I think the first thing should be. The high school gym is very different, and this second proposition is its own thing. So we could put a third proposition on that says we're going to add gyms to whatever schools need it. So that way we're addressing the elementary school needs of all 7 buildings and not just a couple of them. And that way the community will have the opportunity to vote how they want to spend their money. And it's separate. It doesn't need to be money together.
Dr. Park?
I agree with the making it as a third proposition, but not at the budget, not just for 2 schools, but after reviewing all the schools, at the money altogether, so public knows that it's not just for 1 or 2 schools, but it will be all the schools that need the gym. It will be done, not at the same time, like Susan said, but but the budget is there and it will get done so that everybody feels that, okay, our school will also be taken care of and there will be equity.
Mr. Greco?
I know this is discussion time, but I want to ask you a question. Is there a way to have a proposition that is just earmarked for the potential to build gyms at schools that we feel are in need? Or do we have to go to the public with more of a narrow, estimate of what is going to be done with that money specifically?
Yeah, the propositions, actually every word in the proposition matters, and so what will happen after the fact is we will actually go through the propositions with the attorneys and say, here are the things that we said we were going to do with the money, here are the exact estimates that were in there. There's a whole accountability feedback loop on how the propositions are structured. So that's a long way of answering your question by saying you can't do a proposition where you don't have a scope of work that is specified. Now, you may say the proposition will include solar, and it will include bathrooms, and it will include ventilation, and then down the road you discover, oh, the ventilation ductwork should run this way, not that way, and so your original plan changes. Or, as happened with our solar project, we were going to put panels on other roofs, and then we realized that there were some trees in the way and other things, and we decided to put the panels elsewhere. So we're doing exactly what we said we were going to do. We're doing solar, but we're not doing it with the plan, the draft plan that we drew up. We're doing it with what's better based on the conditions at the time. So I don't think it's possible to structure a proposition that says, as needed. I think you would have to say, this gym, which costs this much and has this much square footage, et cetera. Now you can ask us to go through and give you an assessment of the gyms, and the thought that I had back when the board was talking about this in the fall was, at least at Whitman and Berry Hill, was like a domino, that it's the new gym turns the old gym into a different kind of space, music room, cafeteria, which then frees up the current space that's a cafeteria to be a classroom, or actually a couple of classrooms. So there's a series of dominoes that fall, and I'm not taking credit for this idea, it's actually Ms. Bellato's idea, our architect. But the point in creating gym space is not for its own sake, but because it frees up other kinds of things that would domino along in the process. And my only suggestion to the board would be, if you do create more gym space, the gym at South Grove is wonderful because it's new and it is air conditioned, but it's too narrow to take a 3-point shot. So we should make the gym just a little wider so that you can take a 3-point shot. And the gym is 4 feet too short to do a regulation gymnastics vault runway. So if we were to build a gym, I would just recommend making it 4 feet longer so that these regulation things fit and they don't have to be shoehorned. That would be, my only recommendation to the board.
Ms. Yakov?
Just to follow up, would it be possible, or how long would you need to look at the 7 elementary schools and just to I definitely think that there's a value, since we're doing work at Berry Hill and Walt Whitman, to do it when we're obviously there and to do the work, because that would make sense. But I do think that if we're doing gyms for 2 schools, we need to look at gyms for the other schools to make them all equal. And so how long would you guys need to look at the elementary schools to see who's in the most need of the gym and to make their experiences equal among all 7, and then we could roll that all into a Proposition 3.
I guess I'm just not understanding why we're so obsessively talking about gym space right now. I think what's more important is to be talking about social and public spaces that make the elementary schools that are crowded more functional. I think most of the elementary schools are having difficulties in their cafeterias, the auditoriums, to some extent to their gyms, but mostly it's about the public space that's being, the communal space that's being used and how it's being used at the buildings. The discussion of gym shouldn't be substituted for what the folks on the ground at those buildings need in terms of managing the communal space of the children. I don't want to turn this into a discussion of which building needs which gym first and in which order and all at the same time versus etc. This should be a discussion about which buildings are exploding with population. They need their communal space to make the buildings functional today. In a period of time, other buildings which have difficult functional communal space should be renovated in a later time when those building populations are starting to expand and they don't fit in the footprint. So the original conception about expanding the elementary schools that were having difficulty was about the fact that the children weren't fitting in the building anymore. I don't understand why we're expanding this to, and it's not Oprah, you don't get a gym and you get a gym and you get a gym. That's not what we're supposed to be doing. I don't understand how the conversation evolved into everyone gets a gym. That's not what we're supposed to be doing.
I know we all agree that if we could take unlimited amount of dollars, every building in this district needs substantial work to bring it up to something that's, glorious and beautiful and more than what we need. But there's a couple of factors here. The first factor is that the gym spaces, I would really like to hear from the elementary school principals as to whether or not the scope of work that we've laid out for each building, for example, the portables that are being, new ones and then eventually being replaced, whether or not that helps them in any way, shape, or form with the free communal space. Because, for example, one of the issues at Walt Whitman, if I remember correctly, was that music is on a cart. By creating more classroom spaces with the portables, is it a possibility that we are allowing music to not be on a cart anymore and in a functional space? The special education classes that are being held for the special services, that are being held in the gym, by building these classrooms, are we alleviating that, therefore giving more space in the current gym for different activities to be held as well? So I think before we say, the same thing like Jack's saying, before we just say, well then, if we do one gym in one school, we have to do a gym in every school, I think it's important to see the scope of work that we've laid out, that we've taken a lot of months and done a lot of research on to kind of narrow it down to these prospects. Are we alleviating other issues in these buildings besides the classroom issues? Because when we did our tour 2 years ago, we saw that these portables have to be replaced. These schools can't sit on a rotational basis. A school cannot sit for 10 years until their portables are replaced, because we're going to take that extra money and put it towards now a bigger expansive project at another building. One of the buildings we were going to put a gym at, and I think the number went from $5 million to do the portable work to something like $15.6 million. So it's not like we're just adding a couple of million to the projects. If we were to do Proposition 3, you're looking at, I'm just saying, using those numbers, you're looking at almost another 50 to 60 million put into Proposition 3 if we're just talking about adding gym space. So just to summarize what I'm saying, because I have a lot of thoughts based on the conversation, I would just like to hear from the building principals, based on what we've propositioned, whether or not it's going to help any of their communal space. If there are things that we can do that are of narrower scope now, I'm all for it. But if it's a matter of adding another 40, 50, 60 million, even on a third proposition, I think it's starting to get where it's just too much. We have to do what we can do in this moment.
Ms. Abramson?
I very much agree with Lisa, and I just wanted to address what you said, Jack. And it's not that it's not Oprah, everyone gets a gym. But I think that what the schools that are now having an increase in population are experiencing, other elementary schools have been experiencing for years. So it's not everyone gets a gym, it's that there's parents who are upset because their kids can no longer take a break and go to the gym during recess and get that movement and get that input, which is very important. But there's 5 other elementary schools, or 6 other, like, I think South Grove gets to go to the gym, but I think a bunch of other elementary schools that have been living like that for years. They're cart at elementary schools for years. So I personally think we have to add rooms and spaces for us. It's very necessary. I think that the way we've designed it is the most responsible way fiscally we can do it. We add over here, we still get to use over here, we get a big bundle of classrooms. But when it comes to gym space and those extra things, I just don't want us to look at these 2 schools and say, these 2 schools get it because they're experiencing now, when these other schools have been experiencing for whatever number of years and it's become the way. I don't want it to be the way. So it's not that I think everyone has to get it today, it's that I don't think we should ignore something that has been a problem over here for a long time because it just started to be a problem over here today. And that's my only point. I don't think anybody should not have the benefit of recess. I don't think not have the best space, or that there should be that's what we are trying to look at, the best fiscally responsible way. I also wanted to ask if given the construction constraints already, is it possible that a gym on the bottom?
So Ms. Sacco's question first. You asked how it would take us to evaluate these properties. You have a meeting in February. It's superficial because I never give you superficial, but I think we could do our first cut through at least that question. And certainly, I've heard loud and clear from many of you. You want to hear some feedback from some of the leadership staff and some of the teaching staff. So we'll work on compiling that for you as well in terms of some feedback. And I lost the thread from your question. Oh, very helpful. Thank you. So one thing that we're going to have to construct is a fire access road to the rear of the building, which is startling me with how expensive that is going to be, but there's a requirement that there's a fire access road to the back side of the building, which is not now. So one way or another, we're going to have to construct that. So what we were talking about was locating it behind where the current portables are, but there is a grade there. So the building would have to be built into the grade, which would require some significant earth moving. There's nothing easy about the Berry Hill property. It's too narrow, and it's got a big drop-off right at the back of the school, and there's no room in front of the school to construct. So there's not a lot of parking there, and there's not a lot of flexibility to move around. But the only place that could be done where the existing portables are.
Mr. Greco.
So, coming full circle, I don't think there's any way we can put this out in March vote. I just want to address just one point about Proposition 2, and it sounds like a potential Proposition 3. With particular schools, I'm not going to name any names, that you think would be schools that would be served, not just because of the gym space, but everything else that, every other benefit you get having a new gym at a school or two, we decide to add as a proposition, I think it still needs to be Proposition 2, because right now Proposition 2 is only air conditioning in gyms. So it's a bit of a cost savings if we're going to build 2 new gyms, that $10 million number for all of the school gyms, air conditioning, would not be, I'm assuming you're not going to put 2 air conditioning systems in new gyms. So make sure that we have that, sort of thought through, because the idea of a third proposition right now is a little daunting.
Ms. Vapel?
So I think Lisa's point was excellent about talking to the people on the ground to see, was her point about once the classrooms open up, that the gym is now going to be usable differently than it's being used now, and so that might provide the space. And talking to the administration and the teachers to see what they actually need is going to be super helpful. I was just throwing Proposition 3 out there as a brainstorming activity. We don't have to do it. But I also think that once you look at all the schools to see if the gym is the best use, it could also not be 2 schools, it could be 3 schools, or, it's not either 2 or 7. We'll have to wait to see whatever the whole point is, to see what the information that you find out and can get back to us on, and then we could discuss when we could see how many we want. Maybe we think 1 is the way to go, maybe we think 4 is the way to go, figure it out.
I don't want to leave any of you with the misimpression that we're not constantly talking to our building leaders about all of this, but what I would like to do is compile their feedback in a thoughtful based on the conversation that I'm hearing you have as a board, so that I can get their reactions to this conversation and share back some feedback with you.
And I just wanted to make a comment about the HBT track. I know there was a lot of feedback just asking questions about whether or not turf, lighting, if we should do something over there. And just a thought thrown out there, I mean, if putting turf, here's just a general statement. If we're going to do a project and knowing that we could make the project better by adding a little bit more money to make it something more useful for more of the schools or more teams, more people, a bigger portion of the community, I would be all for that. I don't want to do the HBT track and make it this beautiful thing that the runners can use and whatnot, and put grass in the center, only to realize 2 years from then that we should have put turf because of whatever issues that arise. So if we're being proactive in a sense by adding the turf to HBT and just figuring out, we can always add stands, we can always add that kind of stuff in the future, but I feel like the way you ran the conduit underneath the fields here, just to be proactive in a sense in the future, we wound up putting the lights, saved a lot of money. So if we could just think in that form for that track too, because it is in an excellent location for multiple schools to make use out of it, perhaps high school teams could use it as well, because there's always conflict with games between varsity and JV. It might be just something else to look into as far as the feedback we got from the community members.
Okay, all right, so anyone else, or we good? Okay, so it looks like the board has a consensus on not to have the bump vote in March, so that's going to be at a later date, so we can do more community outreach, and then also to talk to more stakeholders. And then and as for the adding the gym space or the communal space for different purposes, so Dr. Rogers will come back with us, after speaking with each elementary school building to give us a list, and then the board can discuss more about that after that. Okay, great. Okay, Mr. Atrick?
I'm not sure I heard what the additional feedback mechanisms we were going to employ to gather more information from folks. I'm not sure we heard the discussion about how we're going to get that incremental information. I know we talked about teachers, administrators, folks on the ground, but in terms of other stakeholders, what the sort of operating plan going forward is to get that information.
So in the past, we've done public meetings. We didn't do those in December, recognizing that the month is full of holidays and people are generally very busy in December. So our plan would be to do in-person public engagement, similar to what we did before. There are 3 senior citizen communities in the district. We have nice relationships with people who are leaders in each of those communities. I would suggest that we also work through them. What we've done in the past, they've been kind enough to take printed materials from us and disseminate them through their communities so that folks had access to them. And then in the past, they collected questions that came from members of those communities for us to consider as we were working on the project. So I think that's another mechanism that we would use. I would like to start to put some of this stuff online in like a social media format and on a website so that people can look at not just a presentation for the project, but maybe more detail about each of the projects here. You know, a lot of what we got in terms of the feedback was, I don't understand what repointing is. What does that mean? So pictures of brickwork that is losing its mortar and needs to have new mortar put in, and explain what that is and how long it takes. And you know, I think we could do for each of these projects. There were questions about the paving work. It's a big number, but we have 10 campuses. So, you know, we can illustrate where the paving is problematic, and we can do more about giving people detail in terms of the liabilities that we face for broken pavement, in terms of trip and fall and those kinds of things. So I see us building that out in terms of an online presence.
I just had an idea that I don't know if it would work or not, but is there a way, I know people tend to ask questions, is there a way that we could do like on our website or social media or whatever, like questions of the week on like a weekly basis, and people can ask questions, and then every Thursday you guys put out a thing that these were the questions we got this week, and here are our answers, and that way you can answer all the questions that you get, and the whole community can like log on and be like, okay, these are the questions of the week, and this is what people asked this week, and here's the answers, and then everybody gets the information at the same time, but people can get their questions answered pretty fast, and it could be like, you know, it could just be, and people might log into that to get more information, and there could be like an email at the bottom of it says that if you have a question, email here.
We already have a draft of the FAQ document. I was waiting for this conversation to conclude because I thought some themes might come out of your discussion as a board that would inform that FAQ document, but we want to put that online as soon as possible. So there will be a lot of things that are answered there. And what I've seen other school districts do, and again, we have a terrific communications person who can help us think through the social media aspect of this. I'm not the right guy for that. What I have seen other school districts do is they pick out one thing to focus on, a highlight. So maybe questions are a good thing to highlight, but it may also be like, let's zoom in on repointing. Not that that'll be interesting, but you might pick these kinds of things to focus in on and then share that out. So we have the advantage of the Friday update that we do to the community. We can certainly, you know, use a portion of that Friday update, which I think gets a lot of readership, to, you know, emphasize different aspects of the proposal until the public's educated.
I think it gets lost.
I also think that you could put in your Friday update like a link to the website. I think that the FAQ that you're doing is great, but I think people will have other questions. So once they see it, I think that if you, maybe it's once every 2 weeks, whatever it is, I think if there's a way that it adds almost like a live portion to it, that people will be able to ask a question and get an answer within a short amount of time, and then they can ask another question, and you could have the link to the website section in your weekly update that people can log into it, and then they could, you know, it'll be like a living thing. I just think it will be a way for the community to get questions answered fast.
Okay, are we all good? All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.